Feels like I'm stepping into uncharted territory, at least in the context for this one. No, I'm not talking about video games or ultraviolence. I engage in both regularly,
What with the hollowed out husk lining the insides of this place. Turns out only people's brainstems can handle such atrocities like Castlevania Lords of Shadow and Spec Ops The Line.
No, in all actuality, and as you are informing the local Bobby about my misdeeds, I've had minuscule contact with comic books. My only exposure to them besides Cape Shit, which does little effort to get people to read the source material, is another one of my friends who is knowledgeable about them on my few physical copies of Punisher Max. I'm more of a manga guy, stemming from how story progression is generally a straight line, not a web of disconnected tales. That's why I own a few issues of Punisher Max. But before I get into that heated debate about why comics are losing to manga, I'll give a hint, it's what I said 2 sentences ago. I'll get to the topic at hand. Our story begins sometime in the late 80s with a man by the name of Silvestri. Mark Silvestri. Well, not really, as it actually starts with Silvestri's childhood. In his youth, Mark was a choir boy with nary a comic book to his name. However, his cousin had quite a collection, one that interested the young lad. Taken from CBR, my exposure was at my cousin's house. He had all these comic books, he was a big comic collector, and he roundabout got me into the business. I would go there and just look at that cool stuff, but what I was attracted to as a kid was guys like Franzetta, fantasy covers. I had brothers and sisters and they all read all those paperbacks, Tarzan, Warlord of Mars, and all that stuff. Franzetta did those covers. I wasn't reading the books, I still can't read, and I remember the first time that art moved me in any way. I saw this Tarzan cover that Franzetta had done and I thought, that is so cool. So my bar in my head was set at Franzetta, and then I went to guys like Bernie Wrightson. My brother was very into fantasy stuff, so it was all those illustrators rather than comic books. It was those days that ended up pushing Mark into being an illustrator, with his first job being for Detective Comics under Ghosts, The Unexpected, and Weird War Tales. However, DC wasn't the only company Mark worked for, as he did do some guest pencil work for Marvel on Master of Kung Fu. Perhaps because of this, Silvestri would work for Marvel full-time on Uncanny X-Men between the years of 87 to 90. That's when he had interactions with Jim Lee, Wylis Portacio, Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, Todd McFarlane, and Jim Valentino, the group that would go on to form Image Comics. Working under Marvel had its own issues, mainly creative direction, as the artists wanted to come up with their own lines. And this is where the story gets tricky. Not everyone tells this story the same way. As former Image executive director Larry Marder told the Journal, there is a Rashomon aspect to all of this. Everybody perceives what happened from their own point of view, though we probably all share bits and pieces. And our perspectives are very emotional. Likewise, Michael Dean, writer of the 4-part series The Image Story, posits the trouble, of course, is that everybody tells the story differently. In fact, through differing accounts, Silvestri might not have been at the fateful December 1991 meeting. Terry Stewart, the then head of Marvel at the time, was contemplating in his office before he looked up to find virtually all of Marvel's top artists entering his door en masse. He didn't know it at the time, but he was looking at Image Comics on the march. Present by all accounts were Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, and McFarlane's wife Wanda, who reportedly sat in a corner nursing the McFarlane's newborn baby Cyan as one of the most monumentous meetings in recent comics history unfolded. McFarlane also remembers future Image partners Eric Larson and Mark Silvestri being in attendance, but according to Larson and Liefeld, neither Larson nor Silvestri were present. Mentioned above, the creators wanted creative control over their work. This was not new, but the scale was, partly because the demands were so ambitious, and partly because, for the first time, the artists were all there at once. To placate the group, Stewart offered the group control of the Marvel spin-off line Epic Comics, which was creator-owned, though that idea was laughed out of the building. Coming from Rob Liefeld, the Epic line sucks. Hurting his case even further, Stewart used what might be the worst analogy I've ever heard, equating the comics industry to the slave trade. For direct words, there'll always be someone to pick the cotton. That mentality hasn't changed if you think about it. No wonder comics suck. Of course, this is just one perspective, Rob's, as Sylvester remembers things a bit differently. From Mark, Jim, Wireless, Rob, and I had been talking about starting a studio together. I was out there in New York City in 1991 for an X-Men meeting, and Tom came up to meet me at the hotel with this idea of leaving Marvel to form Image. It all happened pretty quickly. Lee had replaced Mark as the penciler for X-Men, but that did not sour the two's relationship, Mark citing conflicts between his own schedule and the workload of X-Men as to why he was replaced. In his own words, I was thrilled to be asked to join them. I jumped at the chance to work with these guys. As an artist, you start to get isolated. Your neighbors don't understand why you're staying up all night working. It was great to be around other artists who do understand. Also, working with them raised your bar a little bit. From there, the tale goes about the same, with the group of artists rejecting Stewart's offer and forming Image Comics in '92. Though I could go into the interpersonal drama that afflicted the company, I won't, as that steps away from the end goal here. Image wasn't the only publisher created in '92, as Silvestri founded an imprint under the company by the name of Top Cow in the same year. The first series run under the label was Cyberforce, though I would weakly argue, as I don't know much about comics, that Top Cow wasn't put on the map until '95 with the release of Witchblade. It's in this series that the darkness gets its start. Witchblade issue 10, released in '96, sees the introduction of the character Jackie, a mafia-made man with otherworldly powers. Because I don't own the actual issue, that's the best summary you're going to get from me. However, the character was successful enough that Witchblade creator Silvestri and David Wall, alongside Punisher Max writer and the creator of The Boys, Garth Ennis, would flesh out Jackie in his own comic, The Darkness. It too, like Witchblade, would be a success. Though that time would yet to come, Majesco had taken a preliminary interest in the property, acquiring the rights to publish a video game adaptation that Starbreeze would develop. Talk about opposite ends of the spectrum. For those not in the know, Majesco is mostly known for publishing schlock. Licensed schlock to be exact, but they do have connections to Cooking Mama, Blood Rain, and Fusion Fall. That last one I will not forgive them for, not because Fusion Fall is bad, but because I'm morally obligated to bring up Bleedman. Nothing makes me lose it more than the panel of Mandy with Grimm's powers perpetrating 911. No, you don't get additional context. Fuck you. Anyway, Starbreeze, on the other hand, is mostly known for killing themselves with insider trading and the oft-forgotten overkills The Walking Dead. That's being disingenuous, as they did develop the Swedish spirits game Enclave. That's the Mandalore quote, right?
This is what you would go out and rent before the Souls games were invented. Back in the day, we just called it Swede Souls, because Starbreeze is Swedish.
And what is probably their most recognizable game, as they only published Dead by Daylight next to Payday 2, The Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay. In fact, Starbreeze was picked to develop The Darkness because of Butcher Bay. As revealed in an article from 1UP, Riddick may have made Starbreeze a critical darling, but the team's deal with Vivendi didn't lead to any significant royalties or instant cash flow. At that time, we were running out of money, says then CEO Johan Christensen. We were 25 people in the company and no revenues, and that was really scary. While the game didn't pay off directly apart from keeping the company afloat, it led to a deal with Majesco that stabilized things for the team. The two signed that deal on July 6, 2004, a date Christensen remembers almost 7 years later, and the one he cites as the best day in his career with the company. We started negotiating with some of the really big publishers at the time as well, like EA, but I realized it would take a long time to sign something with one of the big ones. Majesco were super fast. Butcher Bay showcased two of the strongest points going for the developer. They were good at making hybrid FPS adventure games and that they made decent licensed games. Facilitating the deal between Starbreeze and Majesco was Dan Jevons. Jevons had previously signed Enclave to Conspiracy for publishing, and though he left the company to join Union, he pretty much did the same thing for The Darkness. Union had been talking to Top Cow Comics about a different project, and Top Cow was having trouble getting its properties made into movies or games, so it suggested that Jevons and his boss Rich Leibowitz look at everything else it had available. I read through all of Top Cow's comics, and the one that appealed to me the most, not necessarily because it was the best selling, but the one that I saw the most potential in for a video game, was The Darkness, he says. So we went back, we did an internal preliminary design, the type of game, the type of things we'd like to do with The Darkness, and Top Cow okayed that. They liked it. They said, fine, go for it. If you can get someone to make this game, we'd be very happy. So they gave us essentially a free option of the rights for, I believe it was 6 months or 12 months. A match made in heaven was formed, with Starbreeze and Darkness writer Paul Jenkins handling the development and Majesco the publishing. Too bad Majesco would end up running into financial issues, causing them to pull out of the project. Once again, being a bit disingenuous, I'm Building suspense here, on my part, as Majesco was the publisher for the likes of Advent Rising and Psychonauts, probably their most well-known publishing efforts. Despite the cult following for both, neither game sold particularly well, and with Majesco wanting to launch their movie-based games around the same time as the movie, the company was in a bind. Come a few resignations, Majesco had to sell off their publishing rights, with 2K buying both The Darkness and Ghost Rider. Though 2K did give Starbreeze more time to work on the game, they did ask for a multiplayer mode to be implemented. The Darkness saw release on June 25, 2007 for North America on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, while PAL regions got the PlayStation 3 version earlier on the 20th and the 360 version later on the 29th. The version I played was the original PlayStation 3 release. The Darkness' story is broken up by what I will dub the present in monologues. Every so often, a monologue from Jackie will inform us about what is going on. To save the heartache of having to specify what tense a scene is in, I will relay the monologue scenes in a manner that doesn't break up the flow too much. Speaking of, our tale begins with Jackie Estacado, whose 21st birthday is today, and two other mob members returning from a failed extortion job. Paulie, the Don of the crime family they are part of, and uncle to Jackie, would be royally pissed if the cops now chasing the three weren't already yelling that out loud, seeing as they and Chief of Police Eddie Schroet are in Paulie's pocket.
Yeah, I already told you, he don't look so good. That guy was a goddamn gorilla. Ugly too. Paulie's gonna rip our nuts off. He finds out we never collected his money. Oh, man. Man, we screwed the pooch on this one, Jackie. You know what Paulie's like. You don't collect. Best not to even come home.
Hey, Paulie don't know nothing, all right? We'll tell him the money was stolen before we got there. Maybe he'll be nice, because it's Jackie's brother.
The guy's a You wouldn't know nice if it slapped him upside the head with a 50-pound sledgehammer. Jesus Christ. We gotta get a plan.
Okay. Practical question. You think Paulie was going to want us to take up a construction site? I'm headed that way.
Yeah. I mean, Paulie was adamant, right? Maybe if we whack that guy nice and clean, like, he'll get too hot on us, you think?
Maybe. We gotta get there first. Hey, we got company.
Drive, goddammit! Hold on to your lunch! Great, Mike. You're gonna kill us!
Figuring that all hell is breaking loose, the three decide to follow through with their other job, assassinating a foreman, but only Jackie lives long enough to fulfill it. Barely, as a birthday present from Paulie, a paranoid man who believes his nephew is going to take over the family, almost blows Jackie into smithereens.
Hey, it's your Uncle Paulie. You know you've been a pain in my ass since the day I met you, Jackie. Pissing and moaning about the way I do business. Well, you need to learn who's calling the shots in this family. I've been very, very generous to you, Jackie. In fact, I got a surprise for you. On your birthday. It's in the closet. Have a blast.
Me and Paulie never did agree about the way things were being done. Paulie took the business into selling drugs, working side by side with the cops. When I was growing up, the family had codes. We did business. We looked out for the people. I believe we ought to honor those codes. Now Paulie, he's just a parasite. Wants to bleed me dry.
Now a wanted man within his own syndicate, Jackie survives an ambush in the cemetery by ducking into a bathroom. There, and on the approach to the construction yard earlier, a demonic voice makes its presence known, revealing itself to Jackie when he steps out to face his would-be killers. This is the Darkness. And with it, Jackie butchers his assassins. Leaving the mass grave, Jackie ventures to New York's subway system to find some respite. He does, getting a page from his girlfriend, Jenny. Ringing her up, Jackie is wished a happy birthday and is invited to Jenny's place in Chinatown. Fighting his way there, as any underling in the Franchetti family wants to make a name for themselves, Jackie has a lovely evening with his girlfriend, the only light in his life, watching To Kill a Mockingbird, though he does try to reveal the truth to Jenny, which falls on deaf ears.
Well, you gonna blow out the candles? Happy birthday, rat face. You're finally legal. I know you always piss and moan about your birthday, but I couldn't resist. I mean, you're only 21 once, right? Are you okay, babe? You're being kind of quiet.
I got a real problem, Jenny. Something happened today with my Uncle Paulie. And it's a real bad situation.
Paulie? What kind of situation?
Okay. See, here's the thing. I was supposed to collect some money from my Uncle Paulie downtown. Only the money wasn't there. And now Uncle Paulie's kind of pissed at me.
I'm sure it's gonna be okay. It's been like 9 years since he took you home from the orphanage. Your Uncle Paulie likes you, doesn't he?
Jenny, baby, you don't get it. Uncle Paulie isn't a teddy bear. He's a fucking psychopath. And he's gonna kill me.
Kill you? What are you talking about? What exactly do you do for your Uncle Paulie anyway?
I'm a contract killer. I, kill people for the Franchetti crime family. I meant to tell you. I just didn't know how, baby.
What? Are you nuts? You are nuts. This is just like you, Jackie. There's something else wrong and you're hiding it with some kind of weird-ass story you just made up. Hey, come on. It's your birthday and I've got a new apartment. Let's take one day off from fucked up.
While Jackie would love to stay with his girlfriend and let the night pass, the true neutral butcher Joyce needs him at the Olive Grove. Heading there, Jackie informs Joyce of the night's festivities, excluding any mention of the darkness, causing the butcher to enforce his no interference rule, though he does let slip that the Chicago families have a huge stake in New York. If Paulie's operation falls apart, his balls would be on a silver platter. Betraying his Swedish stance, Joyce tells Jackie to strike back at Paulie by killing the drug distributor Dutch Oven Harry. Despite facing some opposition from the cops and the drug dealers, Jackie eviscerates anyone standing between himself and the Dutch, though with the death of Harry, Paulie steps up his game, bombing St. Mary's Orphanage. Returning to the subway station, Jackie receives pages from Jenny and Paulie telling him to call them. Choosing Jenny first, she expresses distraught over the bombing of the orphanage, as she and Jackie stayed there when they were kids until Paulie adopted Jackie as he needed a hitman, and asked Jackie if the two can meet up to grieve over the remains. Jimmy the Grape is also going to tag along. Paulie meanwhile talks down to Jackie to no effect. Taking a train, Jackie reunites with Jenny, but before the two can go, Jimmy explains to Jackie that Grinder's Lane is the next target. Not in any rush to see a smoldering heap, Jackie creates his own out of Paulie's drug money. However, a raisin makes for a poor bodyguard, as while Jackie was away at Grinder's Lane, Paulie and Eddie have kidnapped Jenny, the last thing you should do to Jackie, and are holding her hostage at the orphanage. To make matters worse, when Jackie gets there, he sees memories of his past.
I'm not gonna go. You can't make me. I'm not gonna go. I'm gonna stay here with Jenny. You can't make me go anywhere I don't want.
Jackie? Jackie, what's wrong with you? That was the grossest thing ever. When Sister Mary finds out you nailed a frog to the front door, she's gonna kill you. Jackie! Jackie, I know you're in there.
Go away. I hate you.
Why do you do stuff like that? You're supposed to be nice to animals.
Shut up, Jenny. Who cares anyway? Who cares?
That's not the worst of it though, as he's completely powerless to stop Eddie and Polly from killing Jenny. The darkness itself even held Jackie back from doing anything.
Dick, Jackie was so right about you.
Shut up, you dumb broad. You're giving me a fucking headache.
This was your idea, Franchetti. If it was up to me, I'd have blown her brains out already.
Yeah, well, it's not.
Fuck you! Why are you doing this?
Maybe you should ask your boyfriend when he gets here.
Jackie, why haven't you fucked him over
Shut
enough?
your fucking mouth, bitch! Be still and watch.
Okay, please don't kill me. No!
Damn it!
Your flesh is mine. Your will is mine. Well, just in time. I heard you and your girlfriend grew up here, Estacado. What a shithole.
Broke my nose.
And now the place looks like it was hit by a bomb. Oh,
Get up.
what's the matter? Don't know your ass from your elbow with all that demon shit?
You know why we're here? Is you heard me, Jackie. I took you in for my own. I trusted you. So now all this blood is on your hands.
Jackie, what's going on? Get me out of here.
Shut the fuck up!
No.
You see a happy ending here, Jackie. You figure you got something to bargain with me so that I don't blow her fucking brains out her fucking nose? Cause the way I see it, you got nothing.
It just gets bigger and bigger, don't it, Jackie boy? We heard you, you heard us. It's like some fucking game we're playing here. You caused me a lot of trouble, boy.
You were my blood, Jackie. I loved you like a son, and you took from me. You stole my respect, and you stole my trust. And when blood takes from blood, someone always pays. So now, I take from you.
Jackie, this is not your fault.
Clean it,
What did they do to Jenny? She was a bird in Deus's freedom. Where are you going? Jackie, this is not your time.
With nothing positive left in his life, Jackie kills himself, angering the darkness. Yet, instead of dying, Jackie finds himself on the fields of No Man's Land. Whatever this place is, it's tied deeply to the darkness, with it openly posturing over Jackie. Paying it no mind, Jackie discovers some allied forces willing to help him, one of them being his ancestor Anthony Estacado, who elucidates him on the lore of the darkness. The reason why the world Jackie is currently in is modeled after World War I is that during the war, Anthony became host to the darkness, it being a creature as old as time that manifests itself when the firstborn son reaches the age of 21. Why Jackie is in World War I is that somehow he died before his time because the darkness works on Yu Yu Hakusho logic. To rectify the situation, the darkness is repairing Jackie's body and life side while, I don't know, his spirit goes on a trip for dead side. At least Jackie recovers a cool pair of guns that supposedly allow him to control the darkness. It does need a host, but prefers one that is obedient, as well as track down what I will call the Heart of Darkness before he's ejected back into reality. A few days have passed in our world, with Jimmy the Grape welcoming our guy back to the world of the living. Like with before, Jackie keeps the darkness to himself, letting Jimmy prattle on about how much Aunt Sarah, the rock of the crime family, missed her nephew. Getting the hint that was tossed like a brick, Jackie visits Sarah, the sweet old lady directing him to Gun Hill so that he can put 2 in Schroed's 10 spot. Well, he would if Eddie didn't have a chopper on standby. Good thing the butcher pages Jackie and tells him over the phone that Eddie has a briefcase of evidence laying out his dealings with Polly somewhere in the Turkish baths. Nabbing it and prepping it with a booby trap, Jackie forces Eddie into negotiations at Trinity Church. It's a formality, a shock to no one, but Jackie ends up killing the chief alongside himself.
Boy, you sure did put the cat among the pigeons, Estacado. You know what I'm saying?
No, stupid puppet.
And that was the second time I died.
You don't know what you've done.
Deadside once again with the help of Anthony, who ends up being thrown into a pit for divulging a bit too much information about the darkness. Jackie penetrates the Heart of Darkness to directly confront the darkness. When bullets prove to do nothing, following the words of Ginny, Jackie embraces the darkness, allowing some form of control over it.
I am yours to control, for now. But Jackie, with each life you take, I grow closer to owning your soul.
Jackie Estacado.
However, for each person Jackie kills now, the darkness wrangles more dominion over him. Luckily, Jackie doesn't have to kill any more people, I say, as he follows the lead mentioned by one of Schroed's cronies during the torture session. Mother of God. Running it by Sarah and Butcher, it turns out to be a reference to the ship the Santa Maria, the final piece in Polly's operation. Sinking it, all-out war breaks out between Jackie's old guard and Polly's loyalists. Fending off the men attacking Sarah's apartment, Jackie receives one last lead from Joyce, this one for Polly's lighthouse turned mansion. Taking a boat ride there and fueled by both bloodlust and a solar eclipse, Jackie loses himself for good.
All control of the prison is mine. We are the stuff of nightmare. You like the blood, don't you?
You think you made a difference here, Estacado? Changed, you fucking piker!
saw it by yourself, Jackie. I didn't do shit that you didn't do yourself. The problem with you is you never learned how to listen. You always wanted to be me. It doesn't work that way, Jackie. You got something that's stuck with the dog. It's a neat trick. But you don't have what it takes to capitalize. Who cares about some dead kid when you could own the world? See with the weakness, Jackie. You shouldn't have cared. You ain't gonna kill me! You know why? 'Cause you're soft!
This is the last one. Finish him.
I would have seen you right, but you fucked me, and that means you ain't worth shit to me! Listen, Jackie, I've been thinking... I know this worked out bad for both of us, but there's no need to be rash here. Why don't you fucking listen to me, you piece of shit?
When he dies, I own you. Take his life so that I can take yours.
I mean, you think hard. Don't make a hasty decision. I could do a lot for a guy like you. Jesus, listen, I'm serious. Anything you want, you just ask. I can get it for you. You want a cut? Just say the word. We're both men of the world, you and me. We know the score. Just let me go, okay?
Kill him and lose your soul to me.
Don't do this, Jackie. Please. I'm begging you on my very soul.
For me, make the maggot suffer. Do it, Jackie. Now!
Estacado, you fucking piece of shit. I hope you rot in hell forever.
Now you are mine. Mine.
And that was the end of the line.
Our tale ends in a dream, the last place Jackie and Jenny can ever see each other.
Didn't I tell you so, sweets?
Jenny?
We get one moment, Jackie. It's all they can allow.
What? Who?
Just one moment. Just to say goodbye.
You were everything to me. And all I ever did was kill you. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
I can't forgive you, Jackie. How can I forgive you when it wasn't your fault? You have to go now.
I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you.
I know.
I dreaming?
Yes. You have to wake up now. Wake up.
The tale of Jackie Estacado is one of tragedy. Unpreventable tragedy, not only because of the sins of the father, but also his lifestyle. Jackie may come across as a nicer guy in public company, as seen when he's with Jenny, Aunt Sarah, or others he respects, but it bellies a fierce darkness hell-bent on lashing out. He is a top, possibly the top hitman in the Franchetti crime family, so the act of killing means little to him. Jackie sees it as another day on the job, and he may possibly enjoy it. This traces back to his childhood at the orphanage where he had issues where he nailed frogs to doors. Though we don't have the full context, as past Jenny just throws that out into the open, it kinda comes across that Jackie got some form of enjoyment out of it. In one of the monologues, Jackie even mentions that going to Grinder's Lane made him want to kick a dog, at least confirming that acts of violence are a form of stress relief. The Estacado family is no stranger to indulging in violence. Anthony Estacado, at least from what the Darkness hints at in the Level 0 comic, wasn't an innocent man. He also did take the Darkness's deal of avoiding death by being a host, though Anthony does have some form of remorse when it came to that action. But that is all the Darkness really needs, one slip-up. The character of the Darkness holds a personal attachment to Jackie, but before I cover that, the Darkness is also a metaphorical figure, that being the darkness within people's hearts. Wow, that didn't need to be explained at all, but here I am phrasing that sentence like it's the discovery of the year. It's why I think that the world within the darkness takes the form of World War I, not only for that connection to the family, as that's when Anthony brought it upon the Estacados, but from a historical sense. If you know anything about World War I, you should know the glorification of it. Many civilians, particularly German and English, signed up to fight as an honorable sacrifice. There was glory to be earned fighting for the fatherland, and when I say that out loud, that comes across as insane. Glory? Where? Ah, you mean in the trench where I saw my buddy get his head chunked from sniper fire and the Skaven are nipping at me like I'm made of warpstone? Countless young men were duped into participating in violence because it was glamorized. How is that any different from what the darkness does to its hosts? It promises the world while goading its vessels into horrific acts, praising them for mindless slaughter just like those who pushed people younger than them into war. Or, as they would call it, heroic deeds. I would bring up All Quiet on the Western Front as it has the perfect comparison for this, but what the fuck is reading? The darkness, in turn, is all the negative aspects of Jackie Estacado, his wanton need for murder, his burning rage, his obsession with revenge. But that is what I think makes the relationship between Jackie and the darkness much different from other people's. Jackie himself is the mask, with the darkness being what lies beneath. I know how weird that sounds, as I've stated previously that the darkness, metaphorically, is the evil half of people, but that doesn't mean it's their true personality. For Jackie, though, it is. Jackie makes a big deal about codes, about honor, about doing things the right way, but how is he any different from Paulie? Both are still in the business of crime, both see murder as a completely viable option, and both indulge on the suffering of others. The only degrees of separation for the two is that Jackie isn't upfront with his pleasure, as the darkness speaks for him on that angle, and that Jenny acts as Jackie's morality pet. Out of everyone in the story, it's Jenny I feel the most sorry for, as she was the only innocent party. Jenny was Jackie's light in the darkness, the only figure that could highlight his better qualities or what little that he had. She was the only one that hung around him during their days in the orphanage, and she even managed to talk him out of pinning frogs to doors. And yet, it was because of Jenny's connection to Jackie that she was killed. Though while Paulie and Eddie just saw it as a way to mess with Jackie, I think of her as more of an indirect sacrifice. With the severing of her divine light, Jackie had no reason to hide who he was anymore, despite weekly protesting to the darkness. It's darkly ironic that Jenny tells Jackie right before she gets snuffed out that he was never at fault, which is honestly a lie. Jackie never told her the truth of his working condition, and even if he does decide to do it, as he can when meeting Jenny in her apartment, he lets her shoot down his confession as strange ramblings. To twist the knife in even further, the darkness uses Jenny as a way to control Jackie, but not in the more overt sense. Yes, the darkness is controlling Jackie through his revenge, and I'll cover that in the good section, but who is the one to say to Jackie to embrace the darkness during his fight with it in the heart? Jenny. Not the actual Ginny the way I see it, but the darkness manifesting her as a voice of reason. That's why I always find what Anthony says in the heart befuddling as well. While we don't know what the darkness is capable of within its own world, I like the idea that it's a place that it has full control of, right down to the people that appear in it. What I'm saying is that the darkness presented Anthony to Jackie as a reliable source, while the darkness itself played the villain. Essentially, the darkness played both sides so that I could get Jackie to embrace it, using his own distrust of the darkness and his belief in family. Why should Jackie distrust Anthony? Using that line of thinking recontextualizes the nightmare sequences, and I read Jackie having to fight for the otherworld as the darkness making sure that Jackie is a powerful host. What good would it be for the darkness if the host couldn't stand up to major threats? Out of all the villains in the story, which there are 3 of, the darkness comes across as the most scheming. Polly and Shrouded are men out of their gourd, while the darkness is true evil. The worst that Polly and Shrouded did was kill Ginny, but that was only the tip of the iceberg for the darkness. There's a reason why after Ginny is killed that Polly and Eddie fall into the background, because what else could they do? I mean, look at their names. Polly and Eddie are probably the least threatening names ever, one reminding me of Biodome and the other another Eddie who was equally as laughable until he wasn't. That's not me saying that the story doesn't want you to take them seriously. It does, otherwise there wouldn't be any weight to their actions and Ginny's death wouldn't be meaningful. It's the scale of how dangerous they are that the story wants to get across. When the story starts, Polly and Eddie are 2 of the most powerful men in New York, directing both public and illicit affairs. Yet by the time both die, each show off just how insignificant they are, Eddie blowing his top over being called as such in a malfunctioning drill, and Polly reduced to paltry begging. Before even that, Polly can barely handle a hostage, earning a broken nose from Ginny. Back to Jackie, as I did start to move away from him, I don't think he is a complete monster. If he was, he wouldn't help those in the subway or bang about his codes. Jackie is sympathetic, and his connection to the darkness was out of his control. Because of what Anthony did, Jackie was doomed to suffer. However, I don't think that the story wants us to overlook how much Jackie plays a part in his own suffering. His first thought after Polly tries to whack him is to try and get even, setting in motion the downfalls of both his girlfriend and himself. Of course, he would think that he was raised out of the orphanage to be a stone-cold assassin, but it's because of that line of thinking does Jackie get himself into deeper trouble. By his very nature, violence is his answer, and over the course of the story, Jackie shreds what dwindling grasp he has on his own humanity to get revenge. I mean, why else would he try to control the darkness? Here's where I am split, as on one hand, this game is not aged gracefully, at least for the character models. Everyone looks dipped in Vaseline and comes across as off-putting. I know I've brought up the Uncanny Valley before, such as the case in Detroit, but here there is no getting around it. There is no positive spin. The models nowadays look bad. However, at the time of release, this game was at the forefront for pseudo-realism in games, an aspect I won't discredit the darkness for. To at least offset how creepy everyone looks, animations are pretty good, having a slow deliberateness to get across the realism angle. That in turn makes the more fantastical elements stand out. While Jackie and everyone else moves conventionally, the way that the Darklings crawl about or how the darkness powers are animated displays well that disconnect from the mundane and the fantastical. What ultimately saves the game's graphics are both the art direction and lighting. Once again, there's that neat contrast between the regular, if grimy, streets of New York and the hell world that is the darkness. It helps to solidify Jackie as someone who has a foot in 2 worlds, one the dark underbelly that is New York's crime scene, and the other a world of literal darkness. There's even visual representation of that in the game, as the monologue scenes are all about that. In the monologues, Jackie is usually either informing us about people he has to interact with or the world that he lives in while fiddling with his guns, showcasing the crime side he has to deal with, and the monologue room itself is a pitch black void representative of his connection to the darkness. A bit of visual storytelling as Jackie tells you for the umpteenth time about Crazy Abdul. The differences between the 2 worlds reaches its fever pitch during the nightmare sequences set during World War I. It's as if both worlds are blending together. The darkness does have a canonical birth date, that being the start of the universe, but I do like the implication that it was roused out due to the misery brought upon by World War I. In man's darkest time, we awoke a literal darkness whose sole goal is to sow chaos and pain.
Well, Jackie, I was always on your side. Just was just a test. You should never have been here.
What the darkness is probably remembered for is its strong use of lighting. Though I won't say it's to the level of Fear, the darkness had some of the best lighting for a console-based game. Not only that, there's no issue with brightness for the darkness. If the game was made by a worse-off team, standing in one of the many pitch-black rooms would be unfun as you wouldn't be able to see anything. Instead, Starbreeze knew to make sure to highlight objects to make them visible while not taking away from the lack of light within a room. Also killing it is the voice work. The duo of Kirk Ace Vito as Jackie and Mike Patton as the darkness is the core of this game. Kirk makes damn sure to portray Jackie as a troubled hitman who is sympathetic but isn't a good guy. He has a soft tone when speaking to most people except for those who have angered him, where you see the natural-born killer that Jackie truly is.
Chinatown. You're not here anymore. I'm trying to remember you, but all I get is this stupid shit. Like your wallpaper, smell in your hallway. Even my mind is fighting me.
On the other hand, Mike Patton's darkness never hides its true identity. It revels in sadistic glee anytime Jackie butchers anyone, and it honestly comes across as the devil on Jackie's shoulder, steering him to engage in more violence.
Through you, I will display my power. Through you, I am born.
To keep with the metaphor, Lauren Ambrose's Jenny Romano acts as the angel, with her performance providing a bit of sanctuary for both Jackie and the player. That in turn gets reversed on the player during the fight in the heart. The rest of the cast is pretty good in their own right. Bringing up the rear of this section is the music, which isn't bad, but it's not exactly something you'll go out of your way to listen to. There is a nice blend of orchestral and rock mixed with chanting, and in the moment-to-moment gameplay, it serves to heighten the experience, but outside the context of the game, I couldn't tell you which tracks were which besides Jenny's leitmotif and the combat tracks. The Darkness is an open-world first-person shooter with a tiny focus in puzzle solving. I say open world, but that doesn't mean like Assassin's Creed or other Ubisoft games. New York serves as a large hub that Jackie must traverse to get to story sequences, though there are some collectibles for him to find scattered across the levels that unlock extra material such as readable comic books as well as side quests that award collectibles. As such, story progression in The Darkness are point A to B affairs, with Jackie being told what to do or where to go by other characters. A typical story beat for The Darkness goes as such. Jackie is told by an associate to disrupt his uncle's business by going to blank location and doing blank. The player then directs Jackie to said location to carry out said tasks before either returning to the subways to witness another story beat and continuing the process, or receiving a message from Jackie's pager telling him to call a character, which then leads to a story beat and continues the process with set pieces happening in between. Everything is tracked in the inventory, which also contains information regarding Jackie's abilities and ammo count. What I'm leaving out is the amount of murder that Jackie has to partake in. No matter where Jackie goes, someone will want to see him dead. That's a problem for regular Jackie, as his durability is on par with a human's. That means only a few bullets will take him out. However, like your host, Jackie isn't a normal guy. Backing him up is the Darkness. While Jackie is about as tough as tissue paper, when he has the Darkness activated, he's practically invincible. Bullets don't deal as much damage to Jackie directly when he has the Darkness up. Instead, they mostly damage the Darkness shield, which requires darkness energy to replenish. Gathering darkness energy requires Jackie to stand in the dark while the darkness is out, with darkness energy being drained when Jackie is standing in the light, but only when he has the darkness activated. Jackie can also top off his reserve of darkness energy by eating the hearts of his foes, which also levels up the darkness shield, allowing it to take more damage. For as weak as Jackie is in the light, he's the opposite in the dark. Most encounters will see Jackie either lingering in the shadows so that enemies can barely damage him, while he he easily rips them apart or creating darkness by destroying sources of light and pushing forward. To help facilitate this, Jackie has access to a plethora of guns, most modern though there are some from World War I for the Nightmare sections, as well as 4 darkness powers that he gains by going through the story. Weapons are generally categorized into 2 types: sidearms, which Jackie always wields akimbo, and long arms, which are made up of the various shotguns and assault rifles. Each gun has an effective range, and all of them can perform an instant kill in the form of melee takedowns. Reloading in the darkness acts a bit differently from other games, however, as when Jackie reloads, he fully empties the clip. Prematurely reloading means that you lose ammo, begging the question why the reload button even exists. Ammo itself is plentiful, as the amount of enemies per area is on the steeper end, though some guns like the AK or Jackhammer have rare pickups. Moving over to the powers, starting off, Jackie only has Creeping Darkness, which allows him to send a mouth tendril to scout ahead, kill enemies, or pick up items. It is unaffected by light, though it can be damaged and it does have limited range. Whenever it reaches either limit, the tendril returns back to Jackie. Out of all the powers, Creeping requires the most thought, as spatial awareness plays the biggest factor when using it. Whipping it out in direct combat is a bad idea, but enemies don't tend to push, preferring to stay behind cover and let Jackie approach them. Likewise, the tendril can traverse onto many surfaces, allowing it to reach even the furthest away of foes. The next power Jackie acquires is Demon Arm, which acts as a close-range melee attack, but will mostly be used for destroying lights due to how its auto-targeting works. It can also drag physics objects around, though the amount of times this has to be done to progress is minimal. Next are the Darkness Guns, which are a paired shockwave and machine gun fired akimbo style. Firing them drains darkness, and they are the worst power because of that, a paradoxical statement, as using any of the powers drains darkness, but I'll specify in the bad section why. The final power is Blagger. Like being sent to the titular place, people don't escape from it easily. Any physics object or enemy near the vicinity of the black hole gets immediately sucked in, destroying the object or instantly killing the foe. Around the time you get black hole is when the game starts sending hordes of foes at you, thus giving a reason for the power. It too, like Creeping, can deal with hard to reach enemies, though it is more costly than Creeping, as Black Hole drains all of Jackie's darkness, instantly kicking him out of it. Topping off Jackie's moveset are the Darklings. Like the powers, Jackie earns Darklings throughout his adventure. The first one he has access to is the Berserker, a melee-oriented companion that generally dies before it can really accomplish anything. This is a problem for all the Darklings, as they have little health to spare and usually waste it by scampering around in the light. The Gunner Darkling is the opposite of the Berserker, preferring to handle problems from afar with its chain gun. Take note, however, that it can damage Jackie if he stands in front of it while the Darkling is firing. The last 2 Darklings are more puzzle solvers than anything else, as the Kamikaze Darkling blows up weakened walls, while the Light Killer not only does its namesake, but can also power machinery. For as much variety as there is when it comes to weapons and powers, there are only 3 types of enemies. The common adversary the player has to fight are either made men or police officers rocking the same weapons Jackie can. Their toughness is about the same across the board, and their routine is to stay far away from Jackie, plinking him from afar. Some can decide to rush the player if they are close enough, but that is rare. Mixed in with some of the SWAT officers, which are the same as the made men or regular police, are riot shield officers. As their name suggests, they carry a riot shield which protects them from most frontal attacks. However, Creeping Darkness can hit around the shield while Arm can pull it away. Black Hole, meanwhile, goes right through the shield. Replacing the Mafia hitmen and officers during the World War I sequences are German soldiers. The only difference between them and the other basic enemies is that Jackie has to eat their hearts, otherwise they will keep getting back up. The player should already be doing this for every enemy, so I scratch my head on why there needed to be this gimmick for the German soldiers. They are also by far the weakest, as the bolt action rifle downs them in one shot. When Jackie dies, a cutscene of the darkness mocking him plays, revealing events that have or soon will happen before reloading a checkpoint. Checkpoints are generous enough, though some sections do have annoying placements for them. There are 3 levels of difficulty, though I don't know the specifics between them other than the generalizations of Jackie probably takes more damage and enemies less. I stuck to medium for this playthrough. The game does have chapter select in case you want to play from a specific point in the story, though the game is short enough that the feature wasn't entirely necessary. If I had to describe how it feels to play the Darkness, it would be unstoppable. Most of the promotional material for the Darkness described it as being the slasher in a horror movie, an apt comparison if I've ever seen one. This game and Gungrave have the same appeal, that being playing as an unkillable badass able to shit stomp anything that gets in their way. For as much as I will complain about how unwieldy the gun controls are, there is legitimate joy to be had when gunning down swaths of baddies. It helps that all the guns sound great and the enemy reactions to damage are spectacular. The powers are the icing on the cake. Almost all provide a new layer to engaging with enemies, as sometimes the more methodical action of using creeping darkness is the right choice while wiping out whole hordes of hostiles with Black Hole is the way to go. There's also a nice ebb and flow to combat, as for as flimsy as the enemies are, they generally outnumber Jackie, and for as strong as Jackie is in the darkness, he loses a great deal of his power while in the light. The darkness somehow manages to capture both the feeling of being invincible and being a mouse chased by a cat. Hats off to Starbreeze for that, as I doubt it was easy to find that correct balance. It's a nice way of integrating this story in the gameplay, with the shootout in the church taking center stage for that. The scene displays that when Jackie is in complete control of a situation, there is no way to beat him down. Not only does he regenerate wounds so quickly that it's like he wasn't hurt in the first place, all his powers are at his disposal. Schroed's men can barely keep up with Jackie, having to avoid being sucked into a black hole or mutilated by a darkling. However, once the lights come on, it's Jackie that is on the back foot. Now, I will say that I'm glad that standing in light doesn't immediately take away Jackie's darkness, it just starts draining his darkness energy, as that would be extremely annoying to deal with. Here's an unrelated picture of the darkness, too. It means that even though your powers are being sucked away from you, you still have a chance to get to safety. Back to the church, it's probably my favorite story sequence in the game because it shows how out of depth the villains really are when dealing with Jackie. Schroed takes her guy as a simpleton, calling him such when telling Jackie to put the briefcase on the altar. He never gets the idea that Jackie intended for no one to walk out of the church alive. Jackie is a man with nothing to lose, not even his life, something he takes full advantage of, seeing as the darkness doesn't want to die either. That's why Paulie and Schroed are so laughable as villains. In all reality, they're bumbling small names with large egos that only feel powerful because everyone else follows their orders. There's a reason for why the officer voiced by Nika Futterman accidentally calls Schroed Eddie, causing him to be so wound up that he starts rambling. It's to showcase how truly weak Schroed is. The same goes for Paulie, except in his case, he sounds like a stereotypical mafioso with that high-pitched nasally tone that makes it purposefully hard to take him seriously, especially in comparison to the darkness. While I've already praised Mike Patton for his voice work, it's just that good. When Paulie or Eddie threaten Jackie, it's hot air. When the darkness does it, there is a real sense of dread. What's insidious about the darkness is how conniving it can be. From square one, it was never on Jackie's side, but it did everything in its power to seem like it was. Anthony's words stating that the darkness will lie to protect itself don't stress how far it will go to carry out its plans. I fully believe the darkness led Jackie along his road of revenge, down to manipulating Jackie into thinking it could be controlled by presenting Anthony as a trustworthy figure and itself an outspoken critic of Jackie's actions. It fed him a lie, then used reverse psychology to get Jackie to ultimately give himself up to the darkness. By far my favorite aspect of the darkness, however, next to the gameplay and of course the better parts of the presentation, is the amount of detail put into the world. What I mean is that you can look at the street signs dotted around New York to find your way around. While the main story doesn't take full advantage of this, the side quests do, such as the case when Jackie has to track down rival gang members and kill them. While for a few of them you are given a single address, some require looking at street names to pinpoint their location. It reminds me a bit of the likes of Deus Ex, and I was half tempted to call the darkness a slight immersive sim in the gameplay section for a few of the things it does. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of the coolest Easter eggs in the entire game, being able to watch the entirety of To Kill a Mockingbird. There's little plot relevance to do so, but I love that you can do it. That's not the only film within the game, however, as there are plenty spread across the many TVs in New York. There's no getting around this. The shooting in this game is a tiny smidgen bad. If I had a comparison, it's Fallout 3 levels of floaty. I'll be upfront, I don't like playing shooters with a controller. My brain has an odd disconnect whenever I play an FPS with one. Call me spoiled, but first-person shooters are designed with mouse and keyboard only, at least that is what my brain thinks. That's not to say that the genre can't be on console, it's just that I've never played one that didn't feel weird. Back to Jackie's aiming, it honestly feels like a suggestion at times. There's no proper crosshair outside of the red dot, and ADS isn't in the game, just this strange focus that does dick all. Now you know why I used Fallout 3 as my example. Aiming isn't so bad when up close and personal with enemies, but that's a range you engage in about only half the time. The other half of the firefights in the game are from a noticeable distance where the awkward aiming controls fight against you. I will say that the aiming didn't lead to any deaths that I know of, so at least it's not wholly disruptive to the gameplay. My other issue gameplay-wise is how some of the darkness powers are used, mainly the darkness guns. The guns not only get easily outclassed by the other powers, regular guns do the job of the darkness guns so much better. What's the nail in the coffin for the guns is that they draw upon Jackie's reserve of darkness energy. While all the other powers do the same to varying degrees, as arm drains per swing while Black Hole empties out all darkness that Jackie has, the other powers get results unlike the guns. You have to put in so much effort just to kill basic mooks with them, and while you're trying to do that, you're losing defensive power as the guns draw from the darkness shield. I never saw any reason to use the guns except in scripted sequences like the church shootout. By far the worst section in the game is the opening sequence of the mansion raid. The whole point of the scene is that a solar eclipse is happening, making Jackie immortal. However, instead of waiting for the sun to be totally covered, Jackie begins his siege while the sun is still out. What that translates to is clumsily shifting behind cover, which there is little of, hoping that Luigi doesn't bust a cap in your ass for even looking at him. The entire game teaches the player that Jackie is weak in the light. He goes down in only a few shots. However, when standing in the darkness, he's nigh unkillable. That's why cover doesn't exist in the game. Jackie is so tanky when fueled by the darkness that he doesn't need it. Bullets bounce off of him like he was Superman. Yet the darkness goes against this design tenement during the ending for no discernible reason other than having a slow build up to the butchery. I would be fine with that if it wasn't frustrating to play through. Another annoying sequence is the first encounter with Eddie Schroet, solely because the game doesn't make it clear on what you're supposed to do. When Eddie gets into the helicopter, it seems like you're supposed to fight it. This moment happens right after the player gets the darkness guns, which the player is told are extremely powerful. Okay, so you shoot down the chopper. No, run away from it, as there's a tiny opening on the roof you're supposed to go through. What's worse is that if you stay on the roof, the heli acts like a boss, switching between firing its main gun and launching rockets. Rockets that instantly kill Jackie, which is the only indication of the helo being more of an environmental hazard as opposed to being a boss. There is something I skipped over during the presentation, and that would be the frame rate. It is horrible and can make some sections downright unplayable. I'm going to assume that this is local to the PlayStation 3 version, seeing as its hardware is junk. I'm used to handling bad frame rates from games and can overlook it at times, but I know not everyone can, and it would be pretty egregious of me not to mention it. Despite what some would say are glaring flaws, I particularly like the darkness. Sure, the gunplay could be tighter and the frame rate not liquid garbage, but I enjoy Jackie's bloody road to revenge despite how bumpy it can be. The darkness is such a fun concept to play as, and the game, like a previous one I have mentioned, is a fun stress ball. I would say that the easiest way to play is through backwards compatibility on the X-Bone, though if you are up to it, PlayStation 3 emulation is another viable option. I'm surprised it took me this long to bring up my first contact with this game. I had played the demo of it back when I used to download demos after seeing promotional material for the sequel. I think I also owned a gaming magazine that covered the darkness, but my memory of that is a bit hazy. Like with a few games, it's the sequel that got me into the series. Or games, I should say, as I still haven't read a single issue of the comic. If you're wondering, I might cover Darkness too, but not as the next video, as I have another game in mind. Before I give my usual hint to it though, I have comments to address from the video that will not be named. Jacob Parker commented, "So to summarize your thoughts, pretty much an 8 out of 10 game. Would recommend." 8 out of 10? Who am I? IGN? I'll have you know using numbers as a rating system is so pastiche. Now, excuse me, I'm gonna rate my Fate waifus using the Likert scale. Verde Morte, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce your name, I'm just gonna roll with it, commented, "So, Am I insane, or was there a remake of this game made about 15 years ago? I could swear it even had 3D cutscenes like being bitten by a giant mosquito for not buying bug spray from the shop and the like, with a very enthusiastic cinema trailer-esque narrator. I think I remember that it came out before Scan Command was released in the United States, but not long after the last shooter arcade game popped up. I may even still have the disc. Of course, it'd be in a region of my house that hasn't been unpacked for over a decade. I would be damn well surprised over Danger Zone having a remake / spin-off. I mean, anything is possible, what with how many Jurassic Park licensed games there are. As joyous me, I had to look up Scan Command, and it's like, how did I not know this existed? Reminds me of the original Ben 10 toy, or Hyperscan. That would be a neat thing to see if you could find it, though don't put yourself into any hassle for my sake. I like how Jurassic Park has the most obscure pieces of media ever next to some of my favorite childhood games like Lost World Arcade and Warpath. This showing of the darkness is over, but stay tuned for our next feature involving a hard-boiled detective, shoot dodging, and possibly one of the funniest modern-day political ad campaigns.